Everyone, and thank you, Natasha, and thank you very much, the Tamarack Institute, for hosting us on this Community of Practice call. And to all of you who've joined today, thanks so much for your interest. I'm Sheila Murray, co-founder of Community Resilience to Extreme Weather, that's CREW, and I'm also the project manager for the Lighthouse Project pilot. Our project lead was Lucy Cummings, and Natasha Pei is going to facilitate our question and answer session. So you've already heard from both of them. You'll be hearing more. So supported by a year-long Ontario Trillium Foundation seed grant, Faith in the Common Good wanted to learn what contributions faith-based organizations could make to the work of building a social infrastructure around a community-driven response to extreme weather impacts. Our two partners were Brampton's Emergency Management Office and Environment Hamilton, and an experienced community engagement animator joined us in Toronto. Next slide, please. Okay. So our agenda for today, you're first going to hear from Lucy, who is the Executive Director of Faith in the Common Good, and she'll give you some background to the pilot work and context for the presentations that are going to follow. As you've heard, our pilot work took place in 3 GTHA cities, Brampton, Hamilton, and Toronto, and the 3 animators will present their findings from each of their projects. Their presentations will follow the next 4 key areas. Those are the pilot goals and background, community team and activities, their key learnings, and what's next for their work. And by the way, their work has not ended with the pilot. So you're going to hear from Brampton first, followed by Hamilton, and then Toronto, and those presentations should take about 20 minutes. Now, the reason our Community of Practice call runs for an additional 30 minutes today is because we have invited a number of special guests to review our pilot work. After the presentations are finished, Natasha will remind us of the key questions that all of the guests have been asked to respond to, and we're looking forward to a great conversation. So all of us at the Lighthouse Project would like to say a very warm thank you to all of the panelists for agreeing to participate in this review. Next slide, please. Our panel is Milton Friesen, who is the Program Director from Social Cities at Cardis, Bart Harvey, Public Health Physician, Healthy and Safe Communities in Hamilton, Celeste Licorice, who is Advisor of Philanthropic Services at Hamilton Community Foundation, Shannon Logan, Senior Project Manager at Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, Blake Poland, Associate Professor at Dal Lana School of Public Health, and Jed So, Community Development Officer, Tower and Neighborhood Revitalization Unit at the City of Toronto. And then Rob Wypond is sitting in for Stacey Barter, who is with Building Resilient Neighborhoods in Victoria, BC. And as we've heard from Rob, he's in Calgary today. So thank you, Rob, very much. And now I'll hand it over to Lucy to give you some background on the project.
Thanks, Sheila. And let me echo Sheila's heartfelt thanks to everyone who's on the call to share learning on this issue. Next slide, please. So as Sheila mentioned, I'm just going to give a bit of background. Hopefully I'll be very quick. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? In fact, CREW and Faith in the Common Good, and I know many of you and many of our partners have been focused on climate adaptation and community-led emergency preparedness to climate-induced extreme weather events for some time now. So I think the why is fairly self-evident as seen in this slide. Next slide, please. And the other piece of the why in terms of how we structured this project, when we were looking around the world at best practices to determine what could we emulate in order to build resilient communities that withstand these increasingly intensive climate impacts. The key lesson was that the key factor really is the connectedness of the community itself, the social capital, the bonds which tie citizens together. That is the main engine of recovery. It's not about the size of the disaster or or the amount of aid that governments throw into kind of responding to the disaster. The element that is really critically important is the social infrastructure of communities themselves. Next slide, please. So when we started looking at that and I mean, like so much of our climate work and community work, we tend to be very siloed. And so I'm not going to go through all these, explain this slide, but we found that municipalities by and large are overwhelmed with the hard infrastructure issues that they're dealing with when we're talking about extreme weather. And so there's a real gap in services in terms of helping our most vulnerable neighbors. And this project is designed to help respond to that and to help build a neighbor helping neighbor approach. Next slide, please. So what is a climate resilience hub? Well, it's different things for different communities. And I think the key principle of this project was to try to establish, as we say in the outset, an authentic community-driven response. We are trying to add value with these community hubs to existing services being provided by a lot of partner organizations. Next slide, please. So again, Sheila mentioned that this pilot is based on a year's worth of seed grant funding. Thank you, Ontario Trillium Foundation. We love you. And here are some of the guiding principles that went into the project. And as I said previously, that I think what's key was that every pilot is different, each community is different, and you'll be hearing directly from the animators. And I think what we were looking to do, recognizing that, we really wanted to demonstrate that we need a community of practice or kind of a shared learning infrastructure, understanding that there is real difference. So how can we build that? So that was kind of the central question that animated the structure of this project. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand this back over to Sheila to introduce the separate pilot sites.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Just to warn you all, my connection's been coming and going a little bit, so if I suddenly am silent, I've lost the connection. I apologize in advance if that happens. Each of the pilot animators took a different approach to the work. From the top down, Brampton's model continues to be a top-down city design project led by its emergency management office. From the middle, Hamilton's Beasley Collaborative is a growing network of organizations, faith groups, institutions, service agencies, community leaders, and others. And many of them, not all, but many of them directly serve Beasley's many vulnerable residents. And Beasley, by the way, is a downtown neighborhood in Hamilton neighborhood. And then from the ground up, in Toronto, St. Jamestown, the pilot work has been resident-led with strong faith partnerships. Next slide, please. Thanks. So before we start the presentation, I'd like to tell you just a little bit more about the animators. Funding for this project was a seed grant, as you've heard from the OTF, which meant that all of the paid work was part-time work, about 7 hours a week for the Hamilton and Toronto animators. And our Brampton animators' work was supported by the seed grant, although part of her salary was also paid by the city of Brampton. I think it's important to say that the organic nature of the pilot process meant that each animator made a strong contribution to the shape of the 3 pilot models. Michelle is an emergency management professional who has worked on community engagement with the Brampton Emergency Management Office on a contractual basis for about 3 years. And she has lots of duties, but she is truly passionate about her Lighthouse work. And in fact, our project overall takes its inspiration from a name from the Lighthouse work in Brampton. Beatrice has been a project manager with Environment Hamilton for 11 years, where she works on environmental initiatives such as pollinator habitats and air quality. And Lydia has spent many years working with diverse communities, engaging people in collaborative work and helping to build their leadership capacities, and also has a strong interest in the environment. And the animators' backgrounds matter because we hope that similar initiatives will be taken up by communities across the country. Every community is different, and every project lead, whether paid or volunteer, will have their own strengths. That's why we're so pleased to have arrived at 3 models. Offering choice broadens the appeal of the initiatives and makes them that much more likely to spread. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to the first presenter, Michelle in Brampton.
Hello, everyone. Do we have the slide presentation coming up? Next slide, please. Thank you for joining us. This is a little bit about the project goals, background, teams, activities, insights, key learnings, and next steps for the 5-phase Brampton Lighthouse program. Next slide, please. Brampton is a multicultural city of 600,000 people situated in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. In phase 1, we determined that recruiting and training vulnerable sector volunteers from just 20 of our 79 faith-based organizations near vulnerable population clusters would provide an adequate network of helping hands across our city during emergencies. Next slide. Six of Brampton's top 10 hazards are climate related. Our 2013 ice storm taught us a lot about the importance of having resources, both material and human, within walking distance of impacted neighborhoods. Neighbor helped neighbor, and many met, received assistance, and helped at their churches, mosques, temples, and gurdwaras. So in phase 2, we outreached faith-based organizations aiming to sign agreements with them and train them in our community emergency response volunteer program and equip them to offer non-denominational basic disaster relief from their places of worship. Next slide. This is what happened. In phase 3, we had a list of 19 faith-based organizations from different faiths with potential and involved them in 10 engagement tasks. Everything from site visits, emergency preparedness workshops, reception center and activation procedures, and emergency exercises. Our first SEEK team lead is now just completing the Train the Trainer program. And once ready, he will orient his volunteers who will offer a cooling center from their Gurdwara during heat waves this summer, with plans to also offer emergency warming center in the winter. Next slide. It takes a team effort to break new ground and get a project moving, and this one has a lot of moving parts. In addition to corporate preparedness planning, community preparedness, business continuity, community safety advisory work, many team members at Brampton's Office of Emergency Management take turns carrying an after-hours emergency pager and lead and implement safety plans for mass crowd events on weekends. Why do we need 24/7 capability? Because disasters do not take a holiday. Ask Alain Normand, our emergency manager, what everyone called the 2013 ice storm, and he'll say the nightmare before Christmas. Next slide. We received a lot of positive feedback from our Resilientville exercises. Many serve, emergency management staff, and faith leaders participated. Our workshop was about post-tornado assessment, so community resilience in extreme weather also attended. Lighthouse leaders from Toronto, Hamilton, Burlington, and Oakville also collaborated with Brampton's Lighthouse and shared their experiences. Together, we researched, moderated, facilitated, blogged, podcasted, outreached, and promoted the various models of the Lighthouse Project. Next slide. Next slide. I treasure the time spent at the Parliament of World Religions. My thanks to Lucy Cummings and the Faith in the Common Good for their networking help. I learned about tools of the trade used in multi-faith projects and met kindred spirits. Next slide. Our first Lighthouse training took place on 8 consecutive Wednesdays throughout October and November 2018. Experts gave talks on the emergency plan, personal preparedness. We also planned a faith site cooling center, activation kit, and practiced radio communication, conflict resolution and de-escalation techniques, and team first aid. Next slide. We try to inject fun in our exercises and drills. We are known by the city staff as Eileen's Minions. So I placed a minion in our tabletop exercise to see if he'd notice. Yep, this May, his wife sent me a handcrafted minion birthday card. Next slide. But it's not all fun and games. In order to bridge the legal and regulatory divide that stifles capacity building, we developed a champions kit to help promote the program and a capacity building agreement designed in consultation with municipal legal and risk experts and our emergency manager, because all emergency managers had at that time to work with were vague 2-page memorandums of understanding or long, detailed 20-plus pages of contractually binding legalese, also known as a service level agreement, not helpful to emergency managers and intimidating to faith leaders. Next slide. Our site visits revealed some places of worship are not accessible, so not all were ready to sign on. Additionally, faith-based organizations often don't have access to legal and risk staff, so the agreement negotiation stage between the city and the faith-based organization is very lengthy. Things become easier when your emergency manager advocates for a bylaw change and they're allowed to be the signing authority on the city's Lighthouse agreement. Next slide. It bothered me a little bit that our Resilientville only had Christian faith leaders in attendance. The 2011 National Household Survey from Statistics Canada says that 90% of Brampton's population affiliates themselves with a faith. Only 10% do not. But we're diverse. 51% are Christian, 19% are Sikh, 12% are Hindu, 7% are Muslim, and 1% are Buddhist. It is clear that our Lighthouse network must be a multi-faith one and include many different cultures. Recruiting champions to foster understanding with faith leaders in Brampton's fluctuating and diverse faith mosaic, and to build trust and strong connections between potential Lighthouse locations has helped a lot. Next slide. We try to update our Lighthouse stakeholders quarterly and invite them to civic engagement activities. Many have attended our Future Ready focus groups and are now actively engaged in sustainable neighborhood action plans with our conservation authorities and developing sustainable neighborhood social hubs for living the mosaic, Brampton's Vision 2040 master plan. Next slide, please. So we continue with more signings and our network is getting bigger. The program has increased the amount of volunteers available to the Emergency Management Office by 100-fold. Since the development of the Champions Kit, our roster of champions has tripled. Our champions advocate that this program empowers and educates well-intentioned citizens. Next slide. Our 5-phase program incorporates a research outreach presentation cycle. We are currently in presentation mode of phase 4, promoting Lighthouse. I presented our cost-effective program to the Economic Developers Association of Canada back in 2017. My manager presented at DEMCON, hosted by the Ontario Association of Emergency Managers in October 2018, and I presented my academic paper to the World Congress of Sociology, which recruited a cadre of sociological students to our Lighthouse program, arriving to help us with phase 5 in January 2019. And that's promoting our Lighthouse locations to the Brampton public and the world. My abstract was accepted by the World Congress of Disaster Management, taking place next year in India. Provincial Emergency Management has asked us to present our progress at the Spring Sector meeting in 2019. Two case studies about the Lighthouse Project are available, and a draft of Brampton's Champion Kit in PDF format can also be made available upon request. Next slide. Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, Beatrice, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So in Hamilton, the Lighthouse Project has far more modest goals. Can I have the first slide, please? So we were identifying faith sites that could act as potential resilience hubs. We were identifying community partners and recruiting our working table, our advisory committee, and then looking at some of the tools that we could use for community engagement, as well as beginning to look at how we could co-create an extreme weather action plan. Next slide, please. So Beasley is one of Hamilton's oldest neighborhoods. We have a population of around 6,000. It's in the heart of the city. It's urban, it's walkable, and it's highly multicultural and diverse. It's a low-income neighborhood dealing with gentrification and expecting great intensification in the next few years. Beasley has a pretty high population of vulnerable people, like seniors and new immigrants. The majority of homes in Beasley are rented, and half of Beasley dwellings are in apartment buildings with 5 or more stories. Again, many of these groups typically have weak social connections, and that's kind of well, it's really critical to have those solid relationships, the research shows, for bounce back to occur, just as Lucy had mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. Next slide, please. So Sheila and I, we started with a small team. Joining us early in the project was Matt Thompson. He's a key community developer, a Beasley resident, and a friend of Environment Hamilton. He introduced us to the pastors at St. John's Lutheran Church, and from there, things took off. That was a command central. We also had with us on our team pastor herself, Daniela Mertz, as well as Agnes Richard, who is a volunteer and a great partner with us at Environment Hamilton and at Faith in the Common Good. Next slide. Activities we planned to get the project going included just doing that connection with residents and stakeholders, hosting workshops. We were starting to learn more about the Hamilton hazards and risks through public health and the emergency management office. And then we also looked about what we could do, like asset mapping and working with, again, public health, exploring and developing the direction for our pilot. Next slide, please. The big question was, where do people go to cool off, to get warm in the event of an extended heat wave or a power outage or an ice storm? That was the main question of our outreach. Those places people go to, we defined as resilience or muster hubs, even though they would not have identified themselves as such yet. We were trying to bring in that context to them. Next slide. At the start, we conducted asset mapping sessions at the St. John's Church, at the Beasley Neighborhood Association, and other locations like Beasley Fair. We invited the community to attend. We offered presentations bringing in public health and the Office of Emergency Management to speak to help residents understand the risks and hazards of extreme weather and the importance of having an emergency plan. Next slide. We are currently working with public health to create an online story map. You can see this is the start of it. And this map is going to show climate hazards and tell the story of the Beasley neighborhood, including weather predictions, community assets and resources, such as where are the cooling centers, where are the grocery stores, communication sites, and just get a big picture of where, more detailed, like even including the hours of operations and such of some of these sites. Next slide, please. What worked? Well, our exploration quickly began to pick up momentum in the direction of face-to-face, person-to-person engagement with community stakeholders, such as, organizational groups and service providers, rather than actual residents. We decided to stay the path because we realized that these stakeholders know their clients and guests in ways that we would have to take years to form such relationships. A network started to take shape, and this network is newly named the Community Resilience to Extreme Weather Crew. I think everyone's familiar with that, but Hamilton. Next slide, please. And these are the members of the working table, the advisory group that we're working with right now. And you can see we have a range of faith communities, a neighborhood association. We even have some representation from McMaster University, who a student is helping us as well. And really what's going on, if you show the next slide, you'll find that our network is really growing. It's actually extending beyond Beasley, and we have other neighborhoods in the city, such as far-reaching, that are really interested in what we're doing, and they would love to see this scaled up to have this network expanded to their neighborhoods, so they could also be resilient neighborhoods. Next slide. Next slide, please. Sorry. So what didn't work? Well, actual residents were harder to involve. We realized that we will need a different strategy. We need to be more focused and have more time to do this. Again, we had very limited resources, very limited time, so this does take time to evolve if you want to engage residents. Next slide. Some of the key learnings, as I just to go back on this, deciding on a course of action is a messy business. It can be frustrating for people involved because we didn't actually have a project. It was exploratory, so for some people it might be difficult to work that way. So you need patience to continue this kind of work, to connect with groups and invite them to work with us, to come up with a neighborhood extreme weather preparedness plan. The challenge was we really, as I said, we really didn't know what that would look like, and so that did take some time. We were also challenged by the difficulty interest in residents, and I think again maybe it's because we have a project. And the main takeaway I would say from this work is that with neighbors and residents, there's a question of trust, and that takes time to build. So we had that trust through stakeholders who knew us, maybe through Environment Hamilton work and Faith in the Common Good work, but residents, that kind of, especially working with vulnerable populations, it does take time for those relationships to be formed. Next slide, please. And so with the next steps, we are, in 2019, we don't have funding. We continue to look for funding, but we have a very committed working table of professional people that are they want to see this happening. And so they've committed to working with us. We have interest from the university and college students here in Hamilton. So they'll be helping us with data collection and research and helping us build this network further. We have from Environment Hamilton an intern, a student who will be helping us do the minutes and just agendas and getting that going. Everybody on the team wants to help create the phase 3 to figure out what we're going to do, whether it's going to be together buying a generator or together just like educating people, bringing in expert speakers, and just moving this project forward. And I believe that is it for me. Thank you. Oh, and here's a picture of some of the members of our working table. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Lydia, so I am the next. So this is Toronto St. Jamestown, so we are going to see about the project goals and background, team activities, insight, and key learning, and next steps. So the Lighthouse Project Toronto. So our pilot neighborhood, St. Jamestown. So our goals was to work with existing local neighborhoods or community partners, interfaith stakeholders to choose suitable sites, convene key municipal stakeholders to advise, act as a local champions, OEM vulnerability briefing, gather key local stakeholders to form local steering committee, design and develop action plan recommendations to serve the most vulnerable members, and participate in resilient build trainers and run resilient build asset mapping and role-playing workshops. Next. So this is St. Jamestown neighborhood. The common name is the wall between a block. St. Jamestown is the largest high-rise community in Canada. It contains 19 high-rise buildings from 14 to 32 stories, 7,000 units, over 17,000 residents. That is the official number. The official number is around 37,000, more or less. In an area of 32.1 acres, the most densely populated census tract in Canada. These massive residential towers were built in the 60s. St. Jamestown is a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilinguistic neighborhood with people from over 100 countries speaking plus 160 languages. Next. So that was our pilot building. So we choose one that is 260 Wellesley, the Winnipeg building. Ongoing community work is focused here. So the idea is after this pilot, we are going to continue working at this site. The current fact of the building is in the event of power outage, the building has no generator. There is a battery backup for the fire alarm system, emergency lighting, and exit signs. The water pumps will not work. The first 4 or 5 floors will get cold water from the city pressure, assuming that the city's pumps are not affected by the outage. So there are 567 apartments. Basically, it's like around 3-4 people per unit living there. So I guess estimate of 3,000 residents, including children, just in one building. So that you can make the math like a 3,000 plus 19, how many people they are living there. Next. So we were invited into the community by the St. Jamestown CoP and the Oasis project. So they have this like a climate resilient community food hub project. Next. So that was our goal also, like gather key local stakeholders who will act as a local steering committee. So we had 6 meetings, identify key issues, vulnerabilities, multi-stakeholder engagement opportunities in the San Jose Town neighborhood, identify physical sites, programs, outreach initiatives, and activities that could contribute to the Lighthouse Project as we engage residents in order to establish the action plan for Resilient Hub. We were like recruiting new members and also like looking into the faith-based partners. So we invite like around 20 different people to sit in our steering committee. So next. So we reach out to local faith groups. We have the Church of San Peter and San Simon the Apostle, and we have Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church. Next. So the San Jose local steering committee. So we started with 12 community leaders. Activation of the group by monthly meetings, weekly phone calls, almost daily WhatsApp messaging, after of reference. So we were able to create like a very interesting group with residents, community organization leaders, faith members, from 2 different sites, the Catholic and the Anglican Church, and also with a volunteer from the University of Toronto. Next. So that was the part of the team and activity. So asset mapping, identifying buildings and community spaces. You're going to see the green spot with the yellow center. That is the 19 high-rise building. The orange color is like 2 faith sites, and then a primary school and a community center. Next. So how we were basically is creating the engagement, outreaching and engagement part was and to know also what exactly is in the neighborhood. That's visual mapping. So we were having all this exploratory work around the neighborhood with the help of the local residents. Next. So also we were able to start to connect the program with local organization and the current program. So we did 4 activities. Like for example, this picture is about emergency preparedness and backup kit list with the homework class with 60 children and the mothers and staff members. Next. That was our community outreach and engagement research. So we were around 14 information sessions meetings, 5 local steering committee meetings, 4 asset mapping workshops, 2 resilient build role play stimulations, 8 lobby information tables, 60 inventory scale surveys, 20 individual interviews, and there are out of over 2,000 pilot brochures. Participation in 6 different community events and festivals, and also at the end we have a project video, crisis and opportunities as a Town. Next. So the outreach tool, so promotional material. So we create the project logo basically is to branding the pilot inside the neighborhood, and it was very easy for residents to know who we are. So the postcard invitation that was every month to invite for these steering committee meetings. We have also the project brochure about very easy way to explain about the project. And also we were asking people to fill our inventory survey. Next. So the insight and key learning. So that was the working team. So we created this plan also to learn what exactly is in the community, because that was the intervention for we didn't have any strong connection in the community. So the whole idea was to start connecting with all these different physical facilities, residents, services providers, program services. But also the main idea was to have a very strong advisory committee, a local, basically it's external collaborators. And with the local people, basically is to create the local stakeholder committee, 8 to 10 community leaders in order to create the San Jose Town Lighthouse emergency hub. So it was a very great tool for mapping and to know what exactly is in the neighborhood, but some of them worked and to create the working team. Next. So that was our hope, was to establish a strong partnership with local organizations and to support the integration of community preparedness into the existing programming. So with the project, so we contacted over 10 local organizations, one primary school, a library, 2 faith sites, and a community center. And it was through like a formal letter, electronic pilot brochure, site visit, meetings. And this is who joined us. So basically, it's one community organization who is our partner for this pilot, St. James Town Cooperative. We have a 2 faith sites, St. Peter's and Simon the Apostle Anglican Church and Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church. And one community agency who was like, open for us to work with their current programs. So that is Community Matters. And we did 2 interventions in Homework Club and the English Cafe Club. Next. So being work, so work collaboration with key municipal stakeholders, the city councilor, with the community center, library staff, with academics. So basically we didn't have too much lag with our external collaboration. So the idea was for them to provide us insight about how we need to do, or basically how to improve our work as a JSTOW. At the end, we got 2 very strong champions. One is Jill, and from Public Health, and from OE, and Toy Stewart, who was the former project coordinator. And also what didn't work also is the partnership creation and working in collaboration with local community agencies and the public school. So it's very hard for this, especially in this neighborhood, to start connecting with all these different agencies. They are very into their own spaces and working their own programs. It's very hard to break that kind of silo mentality. So they don't want to basically is to start opening to a new ideas of program, especially when it's no funding, it's not any attachment or any funding about that. So that's what work. The work was connect and work directly with local residents, community leaders. So one-on-one conversations, a relationship building. So creation of our local steering committee, a group of 14 community leaders and residents. So building local resilience. So that was very nice to work with all these people, like a community leader. They really want to create a very strong kind of community resilience in that neighborhood. So also what worked properly was the pilot brochure. It was very easy for residents to recognize the project. The lobby information table, so that was a very simple way to start the conversation and connect with residents. So we were spending time in all these a different lobby or the 19 buildings. And also is using the face sites for our meetings. So always our meeting was done in the Anglican or the Catholic Church. Next. So the key learnings, don't wait for group collaboration with local organizations and external stakeholders. So we spend too much time trying to, basically is to work with everyone in the community. So didn't happen. And what the key learning is not to wait for them. So, and also another key learning is a strong resident group. So if you have a very strong resident group, so it's very easy to identify within local strengths and vulnerabilities, and also through them is to start engaging all the segments of the community, city residents, businesses, organizations, faith communities, and other local leaders. So asset-based community development is a long-term commitment. So basically it's 1 year, it's very short for this kind of initiative. So we need to have more time to basically is to create this type of initiatives stronger. So there are no common gathering spaces around the building in St. James Town. So faith sites have attractive and welcoming indoor and outdoor spaces. So many residents learn about community resilience concept for the first time. Next. So that's a step. Continue engagement with the 260 Wellesley building and volunteer neighbors helping neighbor training. Next. So we have our 14 strong members. So basically is, and the whole idea is to start continuing piloting a community emergency plan at 260 Wellesley. So focus on resilience, strength, and vulnerabilities of the building. conduct community engagement, awareness, emergency preparedness, outreach, and training. So we are working with the property manager of the Wellesley Parliament Square development, and we hope to apply what we learned to the other 18 high-rise buildings. Next. So emergency hubs. We have a 1-5 site that is ready to become an emergency hub. The second phase site wants to learn about the process from the first. And we have been asked to facilitate the collaboration. They really want to sit together and to discuss how they are going to work together to implement these emergency hubs. Next. So this is one of the sites that is like ready to be emergency hub. So the Church of St. Peter and St. Simon the Apostle. Basically, they have a meeting spaces, they have a chapel, they have a kitchen, community hall. They are getting a stronger Wi-Fi, so we need to buy a generator. They have a library, and they have also like a shelter for like very homeless people, like around 30 homeless people. So, and they would like to be an official emergency site with agreement with the City of Toronto's Office of Emergency Management. Next. So we will need funding. So project coordinator to eventually be replaced by trained Sanjay's town resident. And it is why, because it's very difficult to work with the organizations in Sanjay's town, is because mainly of the employees, not most of them, but they are not from Sanjay's town, they are from outside. So basically, it's the whole idea is like a kind of like office work from like a 9 to 5, and then they just go away and try to forget about the neighborhood. So that's why we say we need to start like empowering the residents and their own neighborhoods. So that's why also we need to do the volunteer training, and why we need we need funding to basically to have an honorarium for community animators and residents to become extreme weather emergency volunteers, and limited capital funding for the hubs. You have to buy generators or something like that. Next. Okay, so that's no money. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Lydia. So Sheila, I think I'm on for this. Before we start going, asking our reviewers to give us their response and invite questions from our gathered group here today, I just wanted to kind of provide an update about what's happening with the collaborative. So as Sheila mentioned at the outset, this project was a collaboration primarily between CREW and Faith in the Common Good, but with our local community, our pilot partners, and we've also been working on this issue with the School for Social Entrepreneurs, and we've had support from across the board. And I think people have gotten a sense also of the fact that residents are really motivated by this. I think that's been such a wonderful, pleasant surprise by the amount of passion that we've encountered from local communities to support each other, to support this neighbor helping neighbor approach. So just to briefly update you, we are, Sheila in particular and her team at CREW is working to house this program under a revitalized, restructured not-for-profit that would be housed on the Tides platform. Lisa Kohler, who's on the call, has been funded by the Oakville Community Foundation, so we will be expanding our pilot knowledge to Oakville this year. We remain, we're spending a lot of time trying to continue to break down the silos and identify fits with existing provincial and municipal climate adaptation and emergency response initiatives across Ontario, and would love feedback on and advice on that. And then I think we are continuing to develop these train the trainer resources. Michelle mentioned, I mean, each of these pilots has produced some incredible resources that we're looking to replicate and share, And we've mentioned the Resilientville scenario planning and asset mapping tool in particular that has been a wonderful tool for all of these pilots. And of course, throughout this, we're just looking to build this community of practice with partnerships and funding. So I will stop there and next slide, and pass it over to fearless Natasha, who is going to lead the Q&A discussion.
All right, well, thank you so much, Lucy and Sheila, and to Michelle, Beatrice, and Lydia for walking us through what those pilots look like and how they were built from the ground up, and some of the learnings and the lessons, and for sharing that back with us. So the next part of the discussion is actually going to inform the project, what the final report looks like, what some of the recommendations are. So we're really hoping to generate from this group. We're looking at the question, this pilot, as was just described to you, the contributions that local stakeholders, including faith groups, can make towards an inclusive, community-driven response to an extreme weather preparedness. So what are the elements? The question is, what are the elements of the project that they should continue to build upon to strengthen the work? And is there anything that's missing? So there are a few people that have been called upon already that are joining us, especially today, that we've asked really specifically to think about this question, to provide some reflections on. And I'm going to just kind of go in alphabetical order, starting with Milton Friesen. In just a few minutes, would you like to provide your feedback, your reactions on what you just heard?
Oh, can you see and hear me okay now?
I can hear you, and yes, we can see you. Okay.
Well, first of all, I think it's just always very encouraging to hear all the hard work that goes into these kinds of projects, to meet even virtually people that are working across such challenging spaces. So, I've heard rumors that there are simple things about community building that exist and that happen easily, but I haven't found any yet. Maybe some of you have. Most of it's just hard work. And I think at community levels as well, it's often challenging. It doesn't have the same publicity profile, often doesn't have the same sort of funding priorities. So you're often working on small margins and the goodwill of a lot of people. And so, but it's greatly encouraging to see that these efforts are being undertaken. I have a few comments that maybe I'll offer into the mix, and then I know others have other things to add as well. One of them that we work at quite continuously is developing social infrastructure literacies. So what do we mean by social infrastructure? The federal government might include things like, well, that's just social programming. We think of it more broadly as all the human social connections, organizational, institutional connections. But I think there's a lot to be learned about that space, whether you're talking with planners or community organizers, different members of civil society organizations. I think we still have a long ways to go in developing stronger literacy, and I think your efforts in this case have shown both when it exists, how things can move forward, and when it's thin or it's disconnected, that the work is long and sometimes can be not reach the goals that we have in mind. I think a second thing was that came to mind in reviewing the slide decks and hearing it today was also thinking about what could be aimed at that isn't emergency response oriented, but which if you attained it, you would also get emergency response things in the mix. I think there's a certain amount of fatigue around climate change issues and things like that. It remains very important and critical. But from a tactical standpoint, are there things that exist in these communities in particular that might be seen as higher priorities or different? And could you invest in those things that are adjacent to it with the intent that the emergency preparedness side will be included in it? Many of you have thought about this. There's clear evidence in the slide deck, but I think it makes sense to to continue to think about that. What's sort of right beside it, that if instead of aiming directly at the climate change or the emergency response kind of issues, is there anything else in a particular community that's driving awareness, and can we piggyback on that to try to carry the work forward? A third piece.
Milton, sorry, it's Lucy. Yeah. Do you mind just giving me an example of what you mean by that?
Well, for instance, in St. Jamestown, I'm just struck with the density that's there, and the fact that there's lots of silos, and the organizational connections just aren't there. The social connections aren't there. That perhaps for instance, or maybe there's not space for it. So maybe the first priority is not even about emergency preparedness. Maybe it's just about adequate community space, if that happens to be something that residents there see as really important. And by focusing on that particular issue, you could bring in the emergency responses in some ways a secondary thing, but something that would be served by having better community space. I was also struck too that in Toronto, for instance, the number of condominiums or high rises that have backup emergency power is extremely low. In fact, I think there was an article in 2017 that one of the first condo buildings had its backup power installed, and it's years after the last ice storm and power outages. So, I just was really struck looking at the the high density, high rise buildings in St. Jamestown and thinking, there's some really basic issues there about power failure, access to units, water, heat, the cooling, all of that. Would those things be core motivators for people? In working at that angle, we can say that's part of being prepared for various emergencies. But it might be the public space issue that's a key driver. I don't know if I'm just saying that every community tends to have push points that people rally around, and they're not always logical. They're not always the priorities we can see from an objective standpoint. But piggybacking on those as sort of the critical energy to get these other projects moved forward is something I learned when I was in municipal government on the political side, that I might have my priorities, but if I work with what the community sees as urgent things, sometimes then we can advance other projects along with that.
And I'd just like to interject, it's Sheila. In fact, in St. Jamestown, we were invited in by people working on a food security project, which is a pretty impressive piece. And so we've supported each other all the way through, because there's an enormous amount of interest in food, all different aspects of food production and consuming, and certainly the larger project that Oasis is doing. So that we're quite conscious of the sort of importance of understanding what community priorities are. But as you say, St. Jamestown is so large that certainly doesn't cover off everybody who lives there. But thank you.
One last piece that we hunt at or work on is identifying missing pieces of social infrastructure that are more broadly used, and maybe that's part of my thinking down this line, which is, are there not only missing physical spaces for people to connect, but are there missing kind of organizational and social spaces? It's longer, slower work, but sometimes putting in those pieces of social infrastructure enables you then to come at a range of other issues as well. That's not the focus of your work exactly, but I think continuing to look for those adjacent partnerships, which you all do naturally, but also pieces that are just they're just missing, but could serve multiple purposes. And is there a role for these kinds of projects to support those as well?
That's great. Thank you very much, Milton. And just to kind of keep us moving along, I know we only have until 2:30 and there are quite a few people to respond. So I'm going to move it over to Dr. Harvey. Are you still there? And can I just ask all of our panelists to reintroduce themselves, your organization, where you're calling in from?
Thanks. Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm a public health physician here with Hamilton's Public Health Services within the city structure of Hamilton. My first comments would be to thank all the presenters, and I mean, there are three fascinating projects, and I would congratulate everybody involved for what's been accomplished thus far. I'm probably going to pick up on a little bit on where I think Milton was going, because certainly as I looked at the slide deck and then heard the presentations today, kind of the one word that jumps out to me is sustainability. And I think Milton was kind of getting at that is why is it being built, and does it have a sustainability attached to it? Brampton clearly has kind of a municipal engine behind it, and emergency preparedness and response as a primary. For the other, and all of them, the other aspect of sustainability is, to what degree is it necessary to get an ongoing engagement from a critical mass of community members? I think Beatrice's alluded in the Beasley community in Hamilton, lots of collaboration of agencies and organizations, but if I heard it correctly, still a challenge of the individual members that are living in that community. Certainly some of our experience has been, individuals in the community, A, have to have motivation, but B, have to have bandwidth or capacity. So what are the other challenges that they're facing? And, do they have the energy, the time, space to be able to engage in a meaningful way in a project like this? And that may not be necessary. It might be the notion of being able to create this network for that neighborhood. So if there are power outages or extreme heat events or ice storms or whatever, you've got this community network, if you will, or community resource that can then be called upon to help that community. St. James, and I think Sheila, your comment about it, it was already up and running for another reason, and this became kind of almost taking advantage of that momentum to kind of expand it. I'm actually more familiar with the St. James neighborhood than the Beasley neighborhood because of my long roots in Toronto. And certainly, that part of Toronto has a long history of being a very interesting neighborhood. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are some historical momentum, if you will, around kind of community activism, that I would be very surprised if it doesn't play a role there. So I'd be interested in kind of hearing others, and I'm looking forward to my colleague Blake Poland's comments, because he knows way more. He's forgotten more about community engagement and community development than I will ever know. So I'm looking forward to his and other comments. But again, I think the notion of sustainability, how much is it dependent upon finding external funding resources on an ongoing basis? That's never an easy thing. And how much of this is really a community development, community building exercise, and how do you continue to kind of, is there a way, I think Milton was alluding to it, to making that almost a self-fulfilling, ongoing entity?
That's great. Thank you very much. And we will hear from Blake in just a little bit. Celeste, I'm going to move it on to you now. Are you there, Celeste? It looks like we might be having a little bit of an issue with your audio.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
All right. It's Celeste Licorice from Hamilton Community Foundation. And I'll speak quickly because I don't know how long my audio is going to last. But I firstly wanted to say thank you to everyone who's been involved in these projects in the 3 different communities. It's amazing work. It takes a lot of courage, a lot of energy, a lot of patience to keep in this work. So as I was listening to the 3 animators talking about the work in the communities, I kind of felt for you guys and thought, well done. So that's my first thing. I just have a few comments. So I think that anything that empowers residents, especially ones that are vulnerable, is really great. And sort of picking up on the first 2 speakers' themes, when people are vulnerable and stretched, it can be really hard to sustain the energy and the momentum to keep that going around something that isn't clearly top of mind on a day-to-day basis. So as I was reading the slide decks and listening to it being around emergency response, I kept thinking, yeah, but if somebody's stretched for food or stretched for something else, it's really hard for them to invest energy long-term in it. I love the idea of connecting with places where people go anyway. So whether it's community food centers or libraries or any other public places or schools where people will tend to go anyway, is a sort of a way in. And again, it's picking up on what the other 2 speakers have talked about, is sort of piggybacking emergency stuff onto what people will already be sort of front of mind. So I love the idea of connecting around those places. I think it's really important that you guys are connecting with who's there. So If you don't have the neighbors or the residents at this point, if you have community organizers or organizations, even if they are making one-on-one connections, that's really important because that's still seeding the project through the community. And so not to worry about too much about not having whole community groups, but as long as you have some connectors, that's really important. It takes time to build these trusting relationships. And I know a year is hardly any time at all, so just keep at it. And then the last thing that I want to say, oh, there's two other things. One thing, when you're talking about faith-based spaces, sometimes it's challenging for people who maybe don't identify with a faith-based building to physically go into the building. So as I was listening to this, and I know it's faith in the common good and it's centering around some faith-based organizations, to maybe think about some neutral spaces or spaces that might not, because that might be a barrier for some people to even go into a building where they associate it with a faith-based organization. So to include schools, community centers, libraries, wherever else you can get. And then the last thing is sort of putting on my Hamilton Community Foundation hat is to think about funding, like applying to Hamilton Community Foundation or your local community foundations. I noticed Oakville is doing some support through their community foundation for stuff happening in Oakville, but to look for funding open call areas where people might be interested in these kinds of ideas, to look for funding that can help sustain the project a little bit longer. And that's about it.
That's great. Thank you very much, Celeste.
I just wanted to jump in and respond to Celeste, to your comment about the faith-based spaces and people being intimidated. I think that's absolutely accurate. And in this project, what we were really testing out was how do you work collaboratively between faith-based spaces and other public spaces or third spaces. So, but we also, at the same time, are recognizing that these faith spaces are really underutilized as community partners in this work. So anyway, that was just kind of the principle. So anyway, go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Shannon, I have you next on the list. Are you attached to the audio?
Hi there, I think I am.
All right, go ahead.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, so I mean, I want to echo, I guess, start off by echoing the comments of some of the other speakers. These projects are amazing. I would say congratulations to all of those community animators and all those folks that help bring these programs together. There's clearly a lot of work that's been done before this, and there's lots more to do. So it's just a tremendous amount of work, and really interesting to hear about them. I know from my own personal perspective, I'm with so I'm the senior program manager with the Sustainable Neighborhoods Group at the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. So we run the Sustainable Neighborhood Action Plan program, or the SNAP program, across the GTA, and we've got one site, the oldest one actually is in Brampton. So we're working closely with the city of Brampton on that. And I know, I guess that some of my comments, I totally agree. These just underscore the importance of that community capacity building, and the importance of having residents engaged and connected and continually, working together and motivated, and that's a huge piece to this. I think some of the other speakers said the same thing. It's a important ingredient in the recipe of these plans, and I think the two neighborhoods pilots really underscore that, and I don't think you would have come this far without that. So that's a really important piece. And I think something that I've been thinking about, we're doing in one of the SNAP neighborhoods in Brampton, we're working with the city management and emergency management office and the other stakeholders on a vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan called Climate Ready County Court, and that's kind of a neighborhood scale adaptation plan. And I know I've been looking at these examples as amazing sort of best practices, and I'm looking to learn from these. But I find it interesting, like the balance or the outcomes of these things, and they're really a balance of the shorter term sort of emergency response actions and planning for that, first first couple days or minutes, hours after an emergency, and being resilient to that. But then there's also this larger piece around the longer term adaptation in the neighborhood, and what is the role of those those public spaces, those parks, the roads and the hard infrastructure. How can they play a role in preventing these things, and also helping to helping to be resilient themselves. So, and I think you mentioned it at the beginning, I don't know if it was Sheila or one of our other speakers, but it just shows the importance of having both the social infrastructure and that hard infrastructure. So I'm finding it really interesting to see the mix of kind of actions that are coming out of these. And I guess one other comment related to that is I think to get that mix of the hard infrastructure solutions and actions from these, it does show the importance of having a mix of stakeholders at the table, including the municipality. That's probably one of the critical pieces as sort of the owner of some of these things, like the roads and the parks. And I know one of our other speakers, or a couple of other speakers, mentioned the importance of kind of figuring out or working with the city to figure out what the priorities are for them in that neighborhood, or convincing them to make that park a priority for change, and to kind of piggyback on that, and try to make the design also pull in pieces that would satisfy the emergency management piece, right? So it might, or just the lower, less urgent stressors like heat, pulling in splash pads or shade structures or gathering places, more those places that can actually function during an emergency, or on those really during those really stressful kind of heat stress kind of days. But so I just think it's really a balance of that mix of stakeholders. And I think it is challenging for community groups, I think, sometimes to find their way through the municipality. So I know in Brampton and in other municipalities we work with, it just shows or underscores, I guess, the importance of the champions within the city, because it really only takes a couple, one or two staff to really help, like, reach out, work with that community group, and kind of help navigate through the system and bring those other stakeholders to the table, because they can, in the end, it's the variety of partners that also have interest in the neighborhood. Everybody wants to see neighborhood improvement and their own objectives in kind of community transformation happening, including the conservation authorities. We have watershed management objectives and a real focus on climate change resilience and rainwater management, stormwater management, as does the city. So a lot, like, you'll find that coming together around the neighborhood and just pulling in the different priorities of different groups would really bring you a lot closer, I guess, or help supporting that hard infrastructure piece to complement that social infrastructure piece, which is no easy task either. But yeah, that's just a couple top of mind comments. Again, congratulations. It's really, really great work you guys are doing.
That's great. Thank you very much, Shannon. And as each of you are sharing your thoughts and more questions, I mean, I know I have lots of my own questions bubbling up. I'm just conscious that we've only booked until 2:30 today. So if there are any kind of follow-up questions, if you wanted to put them into the chat box, or even email them to myself or Sheila or Lucy afterwards, we can kind of put people in touch following the conversation too, to carry that on. So I'm going to hand it over to Blake now. Blake, are you connected to the audio?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Really enjoyed this and happy for the opportunity to contribute. I guess I should introduce myself again. Blake Poland at the School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. And first, really want to have a hats off to the considerable background work that was undertaken by kind of the vision holders of this work, who were the driving force behind it, Sheila and Marilyn in particular, and the hard work of the community animators. When I think about how much money is spent on some things, I think this is like exceedingly good value for money, like most community development work. And I'm really happy we have this opportunity to learn more about it and celebrate the good work that's been done. And at the same time, noting that social infrastructure development is so often overlooked and chronically underfunded, but really so important, especially in this field. And it's been acknowledged in study after study that's examined other extreme weather events like Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Katrina, etc. So I'm glad to see that this message is starting to take root and that there's this kind of good work happening on the ground closer to home. I wanted to underscore that social infrastructure development is really all about relationship building. I think we heard that from all of the speakers today, and it takes time to build trust and connection. And I think what's also important, and we heard a little less about this, but I'm sure it was part of the reality on the ground, is that that kind of social development work doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's a prior history of working relationships and often disconnections between agencies and groups in the community that often complicate our efforts to do this work. So that's often something to be contended with when animators go into communities to try and do this kind of work. I think this is also important for underscoring the importance of working with civil society. And I think that's still an uphill battle for a lot of folks in emergency management and preparedness. I'm remembering a New Economics Foundation report in the UK after the London subway fire, making a pretty strong comments about the prevailing tendency at the time to assume that the public is either disinterested or incapable of responding in an appropriate manner in a disaster, and leaving it all to official authorities. Of course, people in that case were stuck waiting for the authorities to show up at a crucial time where they could have been doing things. So I think this is part of a bigger shift to try and show that, in fact, people are interested in this kind of work. They want to be prepared and informed. And these projects are really important to connecting those dots between the larger scale citywide efforts and what needs to happen on the ground, neighborhood by neighborhood. I was also intrigued by the key role that the Resilient Bill exercise played in each of the communities and in community learning about preparedness. And I think that's something that would be interesting to hear more about and investigate and write about at some point, because I think it's a unique way of bringing the material forward. And I think it's important to underscore the working with frontline organizations alongside, but sometimes also in lieu of working directly with citizens. And Anne Gloger's work, for those of you who know it, the C3 Completely Connected Communities, really talks a lot about that in terms of frontline agencies as hubs and as mediators between local communities and other agencies that work with a broader mandate. A couple of things to consider. I think
sorry, Blake.
Yeah.
Are you able to get through them in just a minute or so?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
I think it's important to work with civil society, but I wonder, I think we need to step back and look at the bigger picture and ask some difficult questions, like to what extent is civil society being expected to pick up the pieces of broken and dysfunctional systems? And what's happening that's eroding community, because humans are by nature social beings. So if we're disconnected, then it's because there are some systematic forces working to disconnect us. Also, many systems are not set up to welcome and facilitate ongoing community-based work of this kind. So what are the barriers that we can identify that have been experienced in this and other projects that would be helpful in figuring out what the levers are of change at the systemic level to facilitate this kind of work? Also, a question I had about what would it look like to do simultaneous top-down and bottom-up work, because I think there's lots of merit in both, and we saw lovely examples of each of those today. Echo an earlier comment also about faith-based communities, that there may be some marginalized groups in the community like LGBTQ, which may not feel as comfortable coming into those spaces, so considering other spaces as well. And I think also one thing that's been briefly mentioned but it's worth underscoring is the potential of working with residents associations in different neighborhoods as organizations that are grassroots and already connected to people in their own spaces. I think I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. There's so much packed into each of these responses. Jadrek, if we have a couple of more minutes, do you think you'd be able to do yours in just a few minutes, and then we'll hand it over to Rob?
Time is very limited here.
We should have booked 2 hours for this.
Yeah, no stress. But congratulations on the great work there. It's very interesting to hear all the great work from Brampton to Hamilton to St. Jamestown. Just quickly, just a couple of quick items here. 260 Wellesley. I understand that it's actually one of our buildings that is one of our STEP participants. Essentially what it is a STEP that we actually have over 300 buildings in our STEP program. And apparently we did actually walk through the building in 2014. And we did have a number of energy, water, and waste recommendations, including generator and also having a plan in place in case of emergency there that I don't think was really followed up with. Essentially what I would like to do is actually re-benchmark the building because it's been 4 years from now and essentially see where they are in terms of where we can find the cost savings. And basically, the STEP program helps participants reduce operating costs, strengthen tenant satisfaction and retention, and improve building value across 6 key areas, which is energy, water, and waste, and hand it down to operations side, safety, and community there. So I would like to do that. That's the one thing. And the other thing is that since there is a 14-member committee that's set up, I would encourage them to revisit actually seeking, and now that there's a formal group, to actually get the local incumbent on board as well, too. There's also a new council. They also said that they didn't have any community center support either, but that being is that the community center is actually going through a huge retrofit as well too, right? And at the same time, if I'd encourage the community that's working there to contact us, and I know I was working with Sheila as well too, to get other local community agencies on board, because I think that's an important key to the piece there, right? Hopefully that was quick enough.
That's great. Thank you very much. And then finally, we have Rob Wypond from the Building Resilient Neighborhoods out in Victoria.
Hey, all right. Yes, very quickly. A lot of people made some great points. Congratulations. I know how much work this kind of stuff is. I guess I'll just sort of talk about how the strength that I see here is, had a very robust kind of neighborhood scale activities going on, particularly in the first two, and then in the third one more from a bottom up. And as someone else mentioned, it would, that's also the missing element, is now to see, can you bring those two together, both that kind of neighborhood scale, organization based, coming together, as well as sort of the ground up resident driven kind of initiatives. I think it'd be awesome to see those two together. And one of the things I wanted to highlight, which I don't know if you did this, I just didn't hear it today, maybe I just don't know enough about your work, but I heard, in our initiatives, we really try to let the residents and champions drive these initiatives. But the only way that really works is with a wider array of connecting points, which someone else mentioned. So, for example, in one place, it was basically a buddy program. So, that's ultimately what they came up with as an emergency preparedness thing. That's what they needed. It responded to their health and medical needs to simply have a way of checking in on each other. So they didn't want any sort of elaborate emergency prep plan because it was just way beyond their scope or ability, but we knew, and they knew, this is the beginning point. And so I just wanted to highlight that because that's what we found a lot. And I just didn't hear you guys talking about it a lot today, but maybe you observed that as well. It's just that wider array of connecting points that will allow residents to become more engaged. And sometimes it also helps different types of organizations also find a different engagement point conceptually.
That's great. Thanks very much, Rob. Sheila, Lucy, would either of you like the final word? Any final thoughts or responses?
I'll just say, I'll let Sheila give the final word, and I'll just end by just giving great thanks. This is so invaluable for us as we're wrapping up this and thinking about next steps. And we will be recording the session and making sure that we continue the shared learning that's going on here. So really heartfelt thanks to everyone.
Yes, and I just echo the thanks from Lucy and from all of us on the Lighthouse Project. We so appreciate your feedback today, and there's a lot to think about. But I think we're on the right track, and I hope we can all stay in touch. And I have much lengthier responses for some of the comments that were made, and I'll do that. I'll do that independently.
That's great. And thank you from our group as well, from the Citizens and Emergency Preparedness, Lucy and Sheila, for helping to set this up, and to everybody else who came onto the call, because this is part of a larger kind of ongoing group of people talking about the citizen role in emergency preparedness. So we really appreciate you sharing those insights with us and bringing it to the group as well. As you go, when you create your recommendations, as you cull all of this information, we'd love to see what you share back in your final report. So Heather, if you go to the next couple of slides, I think you have to jump ahead too. Just as a reminder, because this is an ongoing group, we have the next call tentatively in your schedule for January 31st, 1 to 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. So we will confirm that in the coming weeks, and we'll send you more information with Dell and details. We did record today's session primarily as great information for Lucy and Sheila and the entire team to take back, but you'll also have access to the recording, and just as a reference if you'd like it as well. So final thank you, especially for sticking with us past time. It sounds like there was a lot of great discussion, a lot of great comments and questions, and some resources in the comments box, and we will capture those and send them to you in the follow-up. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a great afternoon, and we hope to see you back in the new year.
Thank you, Natasha.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather and Natasha.
Thank you.